Stan Jabalisco here, proprietor and operator of amateur radio station W1GV, Whiskey 1 Good Vibrations. Here to talk about a specific frequency range of vibrations, electromagnetic vibrations. Specifically, I'm talking about 300 hertz to 300 kilohertz. Now, typically, these are expressed in wavelengths, 300 kilohertz representing 1 kilometer, 1,000 meters, 30 kilohertz representing 10 kilometers, 3 kilohertz representing 100 kilometers, and 300 hertz representing a whopping 1,000 kilometers or 1 megameter. I call the range of frequencies from 300 hertz to 3 kilohertz the ultra-low frequency range. That is also known as baseband to audio enthusiasts and is the range of frequencies typical of the audio stages in a single sideband transmitter. 3 to 30 kilohertz is known as very low frequencies, or VLF, and 30 kilohertz to 300 kilohertz, the low frequencies, or LF. We radio amateurs are about to get some allocations in the LF, low frequency range of 30 to 300 kilohertz, or it would so appear. And it ought to be very interesting to get on these bands and see what happens. But I have always had a fascination, in particular, with the very low and ultra-low frequencies. Below about 9 kilohertz, there aren't any allocations made by the Federal Communications Commission, or as far as I know, by anyone, so that it's a free-for-all below about that frequency. And believe me, if you've ever listened with converters on those frequencies, you know what I mean by free-for-all. It's free-for-all electromagnetic interference caused by human-made devices, unless you are lucky enough to be situated in an area so far away from such devices that they're out of range. Deep in the mountains of Wyoming or Montana or other remote parts of the world, deserts, far out at sea with all of the appliances on the boat turned off, in the Arctic or Antarctic regions far away from civilization. You may hear some very interesting electromagnetic signals in the ULF and VLF ranges. If you will Google on the phrase, what is the phrase? Earth-ionosphere waveguide. Google on that as a phrase, Earth-ionosphere waveguide. And you'll come across some interesting, rather mathematical papers dealing with the effect of the ionosphere and the Earth together on these signals and how the Earth-ionosphere waveguide can act to create a cutoff at the lower limit useful frequency of about 1 or 2 kilohertz. If you'll do some calculations, you'll find that below about 1 or 2 kilohertz, the Earth-ionosphere waveguide will tend to short electromagnetic waves out and severely impede radio wave propagation. That's not to say, however, that noise from the Earth's magnetosphere might still not be heard in that range. A fascinating range of frequencies indeed, 300 hertz to 30 kilohertz. As far as I know, we radio amateurs, are not about to get any allocations in a range down there. Although, since nothing is allocated below 9 kilohertz, and evidently frequencies can be used for communication to some extent between about 1 or 2 kilohertz and 9 kilohertz, that specific range of the very low frequencies and the little chunk of ultra low might be of interest to those of you with enough real estate and enough craziness in the microchip between your ears to do a little further research and attempt to actually have a QSO down there. I'm getting a little old to live out in the wilderness, and I don't have enough money to travel there. But some of you might, and some of you might be eccentric enough to conduct some experiments down there and see if you can actually have a reasonable QSO over a reasonable distance at, say, 5 kilohertz. I actually built, with vacuum tubes, of course, way back in my college days in the 1970s, a little transmitter that went from about 3 to 10 kilohertz, a little CW transmitter that was cathode keyed and used something like a 1T4 vacuum tube, or maybe a 6C4, 6 Charlie 4, something along that order. And I remember that about the only thing that I got out of that, besides a very crisp, clear signal in that frequency range, was an electric shock from the cathode keying when I touched the wrong spot on the little brass pounder that I had. But I did, in fact, transmit signals with a very low frequency converter over a range of about 1 city block, and thereby conducted a successful test of radio wave propagation at approximately 5 kilohertz. Scale that up a few times, get the antenna vertical, get out in the wilderness. By a few times, I mean a few thousand times. And you might actually have a QSO someday with another station of equally insane mind on the opposite side of the globe. We can't do it unless we try. Maybe I'll get the motivation to try. It's always fascinated me. Stuff that was just so improbable and so completely out of the ordinary as to border on the ridiculous has always fascinated me. Because there is where the true adventure lies, in my humble opinion. Little message for the upcoming new year, which many prognosticate will be fabulous, and equally many prognosticate will be doomsday time. I have a feeling the result will be somewhere in between, just as the result will be somewhere in between solid copy and can't hear you at all. In the first QSO at 5 kilohertz from one side of the earth to the other. Only radio amateurs are crazy enough and innovative enough to attempt this. So why not? Stan Gibilisco, Whiskey 1, good vibrations, with a suitable conclusion to a suitably crazy year. Saying 73, which means best regards, and so long, which, even at 5 kilohertz, will mean da-da-da-da-da-da.